The centennial celebration of the founding of Swarthmore College culminated at commencement on June 8, when the President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, delivered the commencement address and received an honorary degree. The jet airplane bearing President Johnson and his party to Swarthmore landed at the Philadelphia International Airport at 9 o'clock, and cheering crowds greeted the President as he stepped from the plane. 100 years ago, in 1864, on a day, April 1st, normally not associated with more earnest enterprises, Swarthmore College took legal form. Swarthmore was created out of a concern of Hicksite Quakers to establish a college, as they wrote, under the care of friends, at which an education might be obtained equal to that of the best institutions of learning in our land. The other world figures who were present to help the college celebrate its centennial were the poet W.H. Auden, lawyer and banker John J. McCloy, biologist Herman J. Muller, economist Gunnar K. Myrdal, Quaker theologian Alexander C. Purdy, and Secretary General of the United Nations, U Thant. The presidential party transferred to 3 helicopters for the short hop to Clothier Fields on the Swarthmore campus. Included in the party were Senators Joseph Clark and Hugh Scott, and Representative William Milliken, Jr. from Pennsylvania, and Director of the Bureau of the Budget, Kermit Gordon. Cheering crowds were waiting to welcome President Johnson. Homemade signs, one of them reading, "Swarthmore welcomes thee," were waved aloft, and the high school band saluted with "Hail to the Chief." Hundreds of youngsters on special holiday from school pushed against a restraining snow fence to shake hands with the President, who held both arms outstretched to clasp as many hands in the crowd as he could.
There you go.
Then the group entered waiting limousines for the ride up the hill to Parrish, where President Johnson robed for the ceremony. The commencement program was carried to the crowds on Clothier Fields over a public address system. Some 3,000 commencement guests filled the Arthur Hoyt Scott Outdoor Auditorium to capacity. Security measures were painstaking, and a K-9 Corps aided police and Secret Service. The 220 members of the graduating class, led by Assistant Marshal Launce Flemister and by Deans Barbara Lang and Robert Barr, marched from Parrish into the amphitheater. In the senior class of 122 men and 98 women were a Marshall Scholar, 21 Woodrow Wilson Fellows, 7 National Science Foundation Fellows, and 1 Danforth Fellow. Marshal Howard Jenkins, followed by President Courtney Smith and President Johnson, then led the academic procession of honorary degree recipients, the Board of Managers, and the faculty into the auditorium. Secret Service men marched close by the President. Newspapers, wire services, and the 3 major radio and television networks sent some 70 cameramen photographers, engineers, technicians, reporters, and commentators to cover the president's visit to Swarthmore, while the White House press group numbered about 35. A lounge in Wharton was equipped as a press room, and 2 dark rooms were available in the Arts Center. During early morning showers, it looked as though a Swarthmore commencement was going to be rained out of the amphitheater for the first time since it was built and first used 25 years ago. But duplicate physical arrangements for commencement exercises had been made in the field house in case of bad weather. Flanking President Smith and President Johnson on the platform were Claude Smith, chairman of the Board of Managers, who presented President Johnson for his honorary degree, and Outant. The other honorary degree recipients and those who presented them, Professors Frederick Cleese, Frank Pearson, Robert Enders, Willis Weatherford, Roland Pennock, and Vice President Joseph Shane were also on the front row. The commencement program began with a reading of the scriptures by Claude Smith. President Smith reviewed the events of the centennial year at Swarthmore, and then, with Dean Susan Cobbs, conferred the degrees to the class.
Eric Raff Reed, Richard William Weeks II, Samuel Madison Worthington III.
By the authority vested in me by the Board of Managers of Swarthmore College and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I confer upon you the degree of Bachelor of Science and admit you to all the rights and privileges of that degree.
President Smith, I have the honor to present to you for the degree of Civil Engineer, Raymond Prairie Ingersoll, who has been recommended by the faculty as having fulfilled all the requirements of that degree.
By the authority vested in me by the Board of Managers of Swarthmore College and by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I confer upon you the degree of Civil Engineer and admit you to all the rights and privileges of that degree.
President Smith, I have the honor to present to you for the degree of Master of Arts, Lynn Davis Smithson, who has been recommended by the faculty as having fulfilled all the requirements of the degree.
By the authority vested in me by the Board of Managers of Swarthmore College and by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I confer upon you the degree of Master of Arts and admit you to all the rights and privileges of that degree. I might say that any young lady who 15 years after taking her B.A. at Swarthmore and after having 5 children comes back to take an M.A. in philosophy is entitled to lots of privileges. He's a very big man. On the recommendation of the faculty and the Board of Managers, I now confer the following honorary degrees.
Doctor of Letters, Winston Hugh Alden.
Winston Hugh Auden. His strict and adult pen has helped to give our age its own appropriate voice and to make modern poetry an urgent art. We honor Mr. Auden as a poet, and we greet him as a former colleague and a friend of Swarthmore.
For the degree of Doctor of Laws, John J. McCullough.
John J. McCloy, lawyer, servant of the Republic, banker who has mobilized the wealth of nations for the benefit of all, advisor to presidents, proconsul, a private citizen who has given greatly of himself in the public service.
For the degree of Doctor of Science, Herman J. Muller.
Herman Joseph Muller, biologist, teacher, centennial scholar. A far-ranging thinker who would bank not the resources of the moment, but the resources of posterity. A scientific humanist who merges in his own mind many minds and who believes that men can turn their dreams into reality.
For the degree of Doctor of Laws, Gunnar Myrdal.
Gunnar Karl Myrdal, author and teacher, centennial scholar, Minister of State and international civil servant, America's Swedish uncle. In the time spent with us at Swarthmore, as in his greatest work, he has shown both his understanding of the Enlightenment and the fact that he is part of it.
For the degree of Doctor of Laws, Alexander C. Purdy.
Alexander Converse Purdy, scholar and author, Quaker theologian, friend of teachers and teacher of friends. The titles of his books describe the aims of his life's work. He has sought to show men pathways to God and Jesus' way with people.
For the degree of Doctor of Laws, U Tan.
U Tan, diplomat, internationalist, conciliator and negotiator for mankind, squarer of diplomatic circles, wise and patient leader of the United Nations. A former teacher, his classroom is now the world, and his subject, peace.
For the degree of Doctor of Laws, Lyndon B. Johnson.
Lyndon Baines Johnson, school teacher, helper of his country's youth in the greatest depression in history, officer in history's greatest war. As representative and as senator, a master of the noble art of politics, President of the United States. Once the eyes of Texas were upon him. Now the world watches with admiration and respect his war on poverty, his work for peace, and his tenacious efforts to make dignity and freedom the unquestioned rights of all men. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Mr. President, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, I feel a special sense of purpose in coming to this distinguished Quaker College for its centennial celebration. Today, more than ever, we value the tradition of the Society of Friends. We recognize that in the outer simplicity of Quaker life and the inner passion for decency and justice, there is inspiration for every person of goodwill. Before President Truman launched the Point Four program and President Kennedy the Peace Corps, the Quakers were working in remote corners of the world to bring hope and to teach self-help to both villagers and peasants. Before we took a national resolve to declare unremitting war on poverty at home, the Quakers were working in urban slums and blighted rural backwaters to help their fellow Americans break the chains of poverty. Before most Americans saw in higher learning a broad avenue toward social progress and individual fulfillment, the Quakers were founding this college and many others throughout our wonderful land. Swarthmore's high standing today vindicates the vision of those who founded your college 100 years ago. 51 years ago, President Woodrow Wilson told another generation at Swarthmore, "I cannot admit that a man establishes his right to call himself a college graduate by showing me his diploma. The only way that he can prove it is by showing that his eyes are lifted to some horizon which other men less instructed than he have not been privileged to see." I have been working in recent weeks to describe the horizon to which our eyes should be lifted. I have tried to suggest the heights to which we can rise if your generation uses the power we now possess to fulfill the promise of America. We hear it said from time to time that the day of the individual is passing. We are told that this is the age of the oversized organization, of big business, of big unions, of big government. We hear that the individual is being smothered by giant concentrations of power. He is being submerged by senseless urban sprawl and enfeebled by the material gadgets of success. We are told that the individual can count for little in the era of the organization man. We're told that many college students today feel alien to this world that they are preparing to enter. Well, I would remind you that earlier generations also prophesied that the individual had reached his final frontier. Our ancestors complained bitterly when the West was won, leaving no new avenues of either adventure or escape. At the turn of the century, prophets were predicting that men would be devoured by the monster corporation. During the dreary Depression years, some concluded that the future, if there was a future, belonged entirely to the totalitarian society. I cite the past this morning merely to indicate that history has a habit of upsetting dire calculations. I believe that the pessimistic prophecies about our future are mistaken. We can share a destiny in which, in the midst of massive organization, the individual finds rich rewards. More than any time in the past, you can find personal fulfillment while contributing to the betterment of all mankind. This testament of faith is not based on an idle dream. As machines increasingly bring release from manual toil, I foresee little leisure for those who work with their minds. We have big problems ahead, and challenging times demand creative thinking. The growth of our population, the contamination of our environment, the crowding of our schools, the congestion of our cities, each by itself could constitute the challenge for the next decade. The world at home and abroad offers no promise of quiet years ahead. We can expect a constant testing of our nation's leadership and our nation's purpose. Unless we stimulate individual enterprise, unless we reward individual accomplishment, we will be the servants and not the masters of the change. In education, we must provide higher learning for all who qualify. But we must also encourage the excellence which inspires a talented student to enlarge the limits of his capacity. In science, achievement requires many technicians working in concert. But we must never forget the tradition of the solitary genius, the Newton, the Einstein, the Fermi, who tests the free range of his own curiosity. In art, we welcome the growth of mass markets for books, painting, and sculpture. But we must also seek to nourish the artistic talent which has not yet achieved a buying public. In the humanities, we must enlarge that centers of liberal learning are not neglected, and as new knowledge nourishes the practical studies. In all areas of public and private enterprise, we must understand that important ideas cannot be fashioned on an assembly line. DeWitt, who told us that a camel was a horse designed by a committee, deserves a medal to his memory. We can and we must set these priorities for individual accomplishment. We can and we must avoid mediocrity as the standard of success. These are wise and proper cautions to protect and promote individual expression in America. At the same time, let us not call forth phantom fears about what the future holds. One of those fears is that the federal government has become a major menace to individual liberty. This is not so. Does government subvert our freedom through the Social Security system which guards our people against destitution when they're too old to work? Does government undermine our freedom by bringing electricity to the farm, by controlling floods, or by ending bank failures? Is freedom lessened by efforts to abate pollution in our streams, by efforts to gain knowledge of the causes of heart disease and cancer, or by efforts to strengthen competition and the free market? Is freedom really diminished by banning the sale of harmful drugs, by providing school lunches for our children, by preserving our wilderness areas, or by improving the safety of our airways? Is freedom betrayed when in 1964 we redeem in full the pledge made a century ago by the Emancipation Proclamation? The truth is, far from crushing the individual, government at its best liberates him from the enslaving forces of his environment. or as Thomas Jefferson said, the care of human life and happiness is the first and only legitimate object of good government. Upon the rock of that conviction, this government is fighting to free 20 million Americans whose rights have been denied and whose hopes have been damned because they were born with dark skin. And upon that unchanging truth, we're determined to wage unconditional war against the poverty that keeps 1/5 of our people in economic bondage. These are the goals of a compassionate government which keeps faith with the trust of its fathers and cherishes the future of its children. Through compassion for the plight of one individual, government fulfills its purpose as the servant of all the people. Let me state clearly what I mean by this government. I do not mean just the politicians and technicians and the experts in Washington. I do not mean only the agencies that make up the federal system or the departments and bureaus of your state government or your local municipality. I include you. I include every citizen. For as Aristotle said, if liberty and equality are chiefly to be found in democracy, they will be best attained when all persons alike share in the government to the utmost. We have in this country of ours a government which derives its power from the consent of the governed, from the people. From those same people must come the dreams and the faith and the hopes and the works which fashion the great purposes of government. From the people must come the private compassion and the personal commitment by which struggles for justice and wars against poverty are won. Because our government is the sum total of the people it serves, the choices that you personally make, the courses that you personally follow, the contests that you personally join, these will finally decide the real character of this country. So as you leave this campus today, I want to remind you of another admonition President Wilson gave the Swarthmore class of an earlier generation. Do not forget, then, as you walk these classic places, why you're here. You are not here merely to make a living. You are here in order to enable the world to live more amply, with greater vision, with a finer spirit of hope and achievement. You are here to enrich the world, and you impoverish yourself if you forget the errand.
Mr. President, we are deeply honored and deeply moved.